It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's distinguished panelists. I'm going to begin at the end with Gioconda Belli, who was born in Managua, Nicaragua in 1948. She was involved in the Nicaraguan Revolution from a very young age and occupied important positions in the Sandinista Party and the Nicaraguan Writers Union. Did I say something wrong?
No, we were just sharing a moment.
Oh, okay, good. I was like, did I misspell her name? Okay. She won the Casa de las Americas Prize in 1978 for her poetry book, Line of Fire, and the prize for the Best Political Novel of the Year in Germany in 1989 for her novel, The Inhabited Woman. Her memoir, The Country Under My Skin, was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in 2003. In 2006, she published the children's book, The Butterfly Workshop, which brought her to us, illustrated by Hans Christian Andersen prize-winning artist Wolf Erlberg. I hope I didn't just punish that name. Erlberg, thank you. She resigned from the Sandinista Party in 1993 and divides her time between Nicaragua and Los Angeles. Next we have Peter Lerangis, who is the author of more than 160 books for children and young adults, which have sold more than 4 million copies and have been translated into 27 different languages. Among his most popular are the Spy X series, The Yearbook, The Sword Thief, and The 39 Clues. In 2006, Smiler's Bones was selected as a New York Public Library Best Book for Teens. His novel, Somebody Please Tell Me Who I Am, a collaboration with Harry Mazer, will be published in 2012, along with a 3-book series called Perfect. He lives in New York City. And right here next to me is Rebecca Stead, who is the author of When You Reach Me, a New York Times notable book, New York Times bestseller, and winner of the 2010 Newbery Medal. Stead's first novel for children, First Light, was a Junior Library Guild selection and a Bank Street College of Education Best Book of the Year for 2008. That's a little, I'm giving a little plug for Bank Street because I'm on the committee. And there's several of us in the audience too. So we're very proud of Rebecca. She has spent her whole life on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, the setting for When You Reach Me. Excuse me. Luckily for us, she abandoned her career as a lawyer to follow the dream she's had since she was 9 years old, her dream of being a writer. So I'm going to begin. We're going to talk a lot about voice today. And I'd like to begin with Gioconda, because she is the only one of our distinguished panelists who's written a memoir in addition to fiction. And I wondered, Gioconda, if you could talk a little bit about how you approach the two genres, fiction and memoir, if you find the process different for either of them, and then if you want to talk a little bit about whether children's books, writing for children, feels different from either of those or a continuum.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to be here with these illustrious people in the company of all these wonderful people. For me, fiction is a process of discovery. You know, I don't know what's going to happen. I have a very vague idea when I start a fiction book. And I always remember what Virginia Woolf used to say about writing a novel. She said that it was like she saw this island in the mist and that she had to build this bridge. And that to get to that island, and in the process of building the bridge and advancing towards the island, she would start seeing what was in the island. And I think that is a beautiful metaphor for what happens to writers. I mean, to me it happens that I really know a little bit about what's going to happen. I have an idea of the beginning and the end, maybe sometimes, but it's for me it's a discovery. And the difference with nonfiction, which I have written once, it's a memoir because I was involved in the Sandinista revolution, so I thought it would be worthwhile to write, since I could write, to write about those times that were so important for the Nicaraguan people. And so I chose to write this memoir that is like a window into my life. It's not my whole life, but it's like a window into this period of my life that merged with the interests and the dreams of so many people. So for me, the writing of the memoir was a process of selection, selecting the memories that you really thought were going to be meaningful for other people, and trying to make it into a structure that would be readable, that would give the clues to other people so that they could kind of situate themselves historically, geographically, and in the intimate story of the person. I don't remember who it was that said, I think it was William James, who said that history can only be told authentically through autobiography, because all the rest was a kind of analytical point of view of history. And so I try to tell this story from my own perspective. And so it's very different, because in fiction you discover, and that is what I find fascinating about writing fiction, and in non-fiction you are telling of a reality and making it yours, trying to tell the reader, trying to put the reader into that reality, and trying to make that person experience what you experienced. And the process of writing this children's book was very interesting, because I was trying to write a novel about a woman who has decided, after many disappointments in her life, to become a kind of a hermit, and goes to live in this little town in the heights of the Sierra Nevada in Granada, near Granada, Spain, Granada, where the Moors sought refuge after being defeated in the Alhambra by the Spaniards. And this woman is there, and she's very sad and getting older, and every day in her typewriter a sheet comes out of a sheet of paper where a story is being written for her. And it's a story of how these butterflies were created, and how it happened that butterflies happened to inhabit the world. And it's like a beautiful story that she kind of has to make sense of. But the novel never got anywhere. I couldn't finish the novel. But then I thought this story of the butterflies is it moved me, because I went to Peru, I bought one of those things that have these amazing butterflies from the jungle that look like somebody painted them specially. And I thought this must have been some artist, it's unbelievable that this just happened by coincidence, or by matter being so smart as to get into these patterns. So I began to think about, what if there is a place where all these designers of all things live, and this little boy lives there, and he wants to design a mix between a flower and a bird. And the lady who is in charge of the wisdom of all things tells him, no, you cannot mix the vegetable kingdom and the animal kingdom. And so as a punishment, they send him to the insect workshop, and they decide to design flies to distract all these other, these guys who have very thick glasses and who are all day designing insects. And they design, all these flies make them crazy, and in the meantime they are designing the butterflies. And so they call for a special meeting, and they let the butterflies come out of their cages. And this little boy is the ¿cómo se dice? The grandchild of the man who designed the rainbow. So he's like a royal, from the royal family, let's say. And so but he manages to get his own workshop. So that's how I wrote that story of the butterfly, and then I had the good fortune of having this illustrator in Germany, who is a very famous illustrator, who illustrated that story that maybe you all know, that called the little mole who wanted to know who done it, of a little mole who has a poop. Somebody poops in his head, and he tries to find out who pooped in his head, and so he goes to all the animals, and so this guy liked my story, and he made all the illustrations, which are beautiful, and so that's how my children's book came to be.
So that was so that was a process of discovery too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Peter. Peter has, I want you to know, written standalone novels too, but I'm very curious about, and we'll get to that too, but I'm just so curious about 39 Clues because of the multiple authors and what that might feel like in terms of developing a voice. So one of the things that we often hear as educators and people who work in children's books is about children who are converted to reading by series. They fall in love with Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys. And 39 Clues has become that for many children growing up today. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, because I think you've worked on Hardy Boys too, haven't you? So, but then you can't really have your name on the book or anything. So
I was Franklin W. Dixon for a while.
So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, Peter, and what it's like to try to develop characters and an overall mystery along with other authors.
Yeah, I just want to say, I can't wait to read your book. I mean, normally I'm not in favor of intelligent design, but this sounds really good. Well, yeah, I did. When I first got started, I came into writing from a whole different career. I was an actor, which actually is very good training for voice. You're telling a story directly to an audience, obviously with voice and with voices, and you learn very quickly what works and what doesn't. And I think for kids, a child will stay with a book if the plot is interesting, if the characters are engaging. An adult will give a little bit. The characters aren't quite as involving as they might like. They'll stick it out for a while because the plot might pull it through, or vice versa. Kids won't do that. They're going to go through to the first page, second page, and if they're not hooked, that's it. They close the book. It's boring. So our job, children's book writers, is to develop voice very, very strongly. And what is voice? Voice is part style, it's part honesty. It's a large part honesty. A kid can tell right away if somebody's talking down to them in person and in a book. When I first got started writing after this career in the theater, I was coming back to something that I always knew I wanted to do and was too afraid to do and too convinced that I wouldn't be able to make a living doing. So coming back to it, I kind of plunged in any way that I could. And the first offer that I ever got was from a book packager who wanted me to write in a series called Sweet Valley Twins. And I said, sure. I mean, as an actor, when you're asked to play somebody who's 3 times your age or half your age or a different sex or a different nationality, you say, sure. You just do it. It's part of the assignment. I think a writer is like that too. So I was open for anything. And this seemed like quite a challenge until they said, well, it's a horse book. And I don't know a thing. I don't know a wither from a fetlock. And so I hung out at the Claremont stables and learned about horses and wrote a book in a series that I had no business doing. I had to sort of impersonate a 13-year-old girl. And so I sort of cut my teeth on books that had already been established with characters who already had voices, and I had to adapt my voice to those, which was great training in the long run for something like the 39 Clues. I went on from Sweet Valley Twins to something completely different, Sweet Valley High. and the Babysitters Club, Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, a lot of those things. At the time, I was desperate to make it work as a career. I thought of acting as work the way truck driving is work, that I just wanted to do it no matter what. And I was going to learn on the job, and I did. It gave me the freedom to know that my ideas, when I would pitch them to a publishing company, would be listened to. So I was able to go on and do books that went deeper into who I was and what I wanted to express. But in the meantime, I still kept my hand in these different series. So when the 39 Clues came along, it was a pretty revolutionary idea by a man whose name I'll say now because I'm sure his name comes up in every single panel discussion on children's literature, David Levithan. David Levithan and Neil Gaiman, I'll say them right now. David, who is an amazingly smart guy, and another writer named Rick Riordan, who is an amazingly smart and popular writer, put their heads together and came up with the idea for a series that would be fast-paced, action-adventure, a worldwide search for clues leading to the greatest power ever known to humankind. The hook would be that this series also had more than one platform. The big concern, of course, is that children aren't reading as much anymore. One of the 39 Clues authors has something that he does in all of his visits, which is he gives kids a high five test. And there are 5 things that kids do all of the time. One is reading, one is watching TV, one is being online. He's 5 different criteria, all of which involve different media. 3 of which didn't exist 5 years ago. And he asked kids how many do all of these things or have done all of these things in the last day, and almost all children raised their hand with all 5. We are starting to lose readership of books. Part of the idea of the 39 Clues was bringing kids into the world of print by going to where they are, which is online, and giving them an online component that's compelling enough but doesn't quite make sense unless you read the books, thereby taking them and bringing them into the world of print. It was a great idea, but part of the plan was to get the series to come out as fast as possible, and one writer couldn't possibly do that. So the idea was bandied about that they would have multiple authors, and all of us, the original 4 authors of the 39 Clues, had experience in action adventure. All of us, to begin with, had voices that tended to mesh. The people were Rick Riordan, Gordon Corman, Jude Watson, aka Judy Blundell, and myself. So that kind of got it off on a good start. My experience with Sweet Valley Twins, etc., and as an actor, gave me a feeling of permission, you might say, to use whatever voice that I could, to use someone else's voice and adapt it to my own personality, to continue in a certain style. And I think we've all had to learn how to do that and keep the plot going at the same time. And the results that we're seeing are great. They're very encouraging. We are seeing, my personal mission as a writer is to go after those reluctant readers. I was not a reluctant reader as a kid. I read everything. But I know that the people that I read had extremely strong voices. I was attracted to Edgar Allan Poe and Jack London and Dr. Seuss and Ray Bradbury and Walter Brooks. I mean, for the Freddie the Pig series, my favorite set of books ever as a kid. And these writers had enormously strong voices. They didn't have wonderful first pages and then leave you flat for the rest of the book. They drew you in and they kept you there. And I think that's the key, is stories that have such a strong voice that we're going to turn kids, even if they're not readers, into readers. And I think that's kind of what we were after with the series.
It's a terrific overview. Thank you, Peter. That was great. And they have made a lot of readers of children today. Rebecca. So much of the success of When You Reach Me depends upon our belief in these characters, the rift that develops between Mira and Sal, the tenuous new friendships that Mira is making, including her friendship with the mysterious Marcus. Can you talk about whether those characters are voices that grew out of people you knew, or perhaps from, pulling on your own experience in that neighborhood at a certain time?
Yes, I can. It's funny though, I was just sitting here listening to Peter and thinking, wow, I don't accomplish any of this with my books. And no, seriously. And it's something that's very interesting to think about because it's something that I hear more and more. This idea that we have to think a lot when we're writing about the way kids spend their other time. They're, watching TV and playing computer games or texting, and I don't know. This is not an answer. It's just sort of a question, I guess, because it's something that I wonder if I should think about more. No? Okay, I won't. For me, writing is it's about finding emotion, and that's the kind of experience that I wanted from a book when I was a kid, and frankly, it's still the kind of experience I want from a book. I want an emotional experience, and when I sort of had that, that period of revelation that probably everyone in this room has had, when I was maybe 10 or 11 and started to love books, in a different way. Not, sort of going through a series of words and performing for people, but, being transported and reacting in a way that was dramatic. I think the revelation for me was that there was this world of emotional honesty. And even though I had great parents who, talked about emotions and did all the right things, the truth is that in my social life, people didn't talk about their emotions. Eventually they did, and when I got to be, I don't know, in junior high, high school, maybe, there was a lot of talking about emotion. My best friend and I would spend hours and hours talking about our feelings, but that was later, and when I was 9, 10, 11, and 12, we weren't doing that, and I found books to be, where I connected to people emotionally, even though they weren't technically real people. And so when I'm writing, I am trying to create that kind of experience for kids or adults or anyone who wants to read the book. And so yes, when I was writing When You Reach Me, I was doing a lot of thinking about this time in my life when books were special. And I was awakening, to a lot of things. I was realizing that people in my neighborhood not everyone had the same amount of money. Not everyone had the same kind of parents, and it was that age where I began to look at my own living situation and at my own parents, and I thought, well, how are other people going to see this, my situation? And so I tried to draw on all of that when I was writing the book. And I think that that's where the voices came from for me. Not so much from particular people, although there was some of that. There's a couple of characters who really are very much portraits of people in my own childhood. And, obviously it was sort of a great gift I gave myself to, I let myself set this novel in the time and the place of my own growing up. So I got to just, this is the big struggle for me is material, right? I sometimes think I don't have the best imagination really for writing children's books because I really like to, I need to be grounded when I'm writing. I can't just invent things. It's not like I'm, like the image of building a bridge, I think is such a beautiful one. but it's such a struggle, to be walking in a world that you're trying to build under your feet as you walk is just incredibly difficult to do in a convincing way, where you're going to reread what you wrote and feel satisfied. I mean, of course, rereading what you wrote is always a big disappointment. But, there are degrees of disappointment. And so I really do think a lot about my own experience when I'm writing. So when I decided to set this novel in not just the neighborhood where I grew up, but actually the time period, so some people consider this historical fiction, which sort of cracks me up, but I guess it is. I don't know what the definition of historical fiction is, but that was really, honestly, a great gift to myself. And luckily, you're allowed to steal from yourself. It's one of the places you're allowed to take from without apologizing to anyone. And so, yeah, I mean, basically, all of it was driven by, to some extent, particular people and situations. A lot of sets, a lot of the places in the book are absolutely my memory of these places as a child. I mean, from the time I was a kid. And that turned out to be this incredibly emotional experience, actually, writing about all of this, because it's all gone, of course, I mean, no one's childhood places are the same as they were, right? And New York is no exception. I mean, the buildings are somewhat there, but the feeling is completely changed. And I mean, my neighborhood has changed so dramatically in the past 30 years that there's really almost nothing that's still around. Very, very, very little. And so this was also kind of really self-indulgent in the sense that I would, I was allowing myself to try to capture all of that, before it was gone. So I don't know if I answered your question, Jenny.
I think so.
I hope so.
And actually, you started to go to the next place I want to go to, which is place. Because I think in all of your work, place really shapes the voices of your narrators or your memoir, obviously.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
I just want to say something.
Please do.
Is this on? I think everybody here should go to Rebecca's Twitter feed. Seriously, there's a photograph that's just amazing. If you know the Upper West Side, she uses a photograph of Symphony Space, and for me, reading that book, the sense of place was so strong. Your book. I knew what streets you were writing about because yes, I think I did. And actually that photograph does bring it back, and I think it's an incredible work of imagination. You say you don't have imagination, I don't believe it for a minute.
Just the time loop, I mean. We had a great conversation about that, Rebecca. And the way kids react to the whole time element and how you constructed that so that.
Although kids do complain to me that they're confused for quite a while,
But then they reread
Then
it.
they forgive me, hopefully, by the end.
I think when kids say they're confused, it's a good thing. I really do.
Yeah, that's
because
what I tell them. I always say, well, that means I'm not underestimating you. If you're not confused, if it's all, very well laid out, someone might be condescending to you. Think about that.
Right. No, and that's what Peter was talking about too, is that kids can pick up on that right away in the same way that all of us do. If we sense someone talking down to us, that's it, the book's closed.
Well, the other thing is that they say I'm confused. That just means something different. It means I'm confused. But if you've written a book that makes sense, and you sit and talk with them about it, and they realize what you're after, it's just so revelatory. Kids, it's like, oh, and then go back and read it again. I mean, it's great. I'm confused means, talk to me, help me. It's great.
But it also can mean that it needs, they need to work.
Well, that's true.
Because
Right.
nowadays we give them everything so easy.
Yeah.
Right.
And they feel confused when they have to think something through.
Yeah.
And I think that is what a book can do that other media cannot do. And I think this sense of place is so important. And children need it so much to have this recreation because we all have inside of us this mythical place, and for each one of us is a different place. And I think, for example, of my country, Nicaragua, where I grew up, and in one night, in 1972, there was an earthquake that destroyed the whole city. In one night, in 1 minute, everything fell down. 600 blocks disappeared. And it was awful because we didn't have addresses. We didn't have the addresses that are normal everywhere else in the world. We had reference points. So you would say from the little tree in the middle of this street, 2 blocks east or 2 blocks north. And so or from this building, from the building of this insurance company, 2 blocks, and so all these reference points in one night disappeared. And I remember the confusion of, and all my memories of my childhood, of my adolescence, are in that place that no longer exists. And I find that bringing it up, it's a very emotional reaction. People have an emotional reaction because on one of the novels I wrote, I tried to make it come back to life, and they thank me in a way, because it's like you probably are doing, Rebecca. It's like bringing that moment, that piece of time into a graphic that is going to be archived in the mind, and those children, when they grow up, they will thank you.
Well, and you also bring up a really interesting thing too, Gioconda, about the mythical place we carry within us. And I think the best fiction takes us to those places. The character might be experiencing something else, but we go to the places that were important to us, and that's what great fiction does.
Yeah, and for example, in my butterfly workshop, what I do in a way is heal my soul, because I had been through this revolution that ignited so many dreams. We had a dictator for 45 years. My entire generation participated in this struggle, and we were able to triumph. I mean, I saw this dictator being ousted. I saw, I was very young, and we were in power, and power in a very wonderful sense, not the lust for power, but more like feeling this country. I own my own country that has been taken over by this guy. Now it's ours. We can make all these dreams come true, and it was an incredible time. But then, like it happens in all utopias, once you start to populate the utopia, things don't go as well as you think they were going to go. We're human after all. And so, when I wrote this children's book, in a way, I was convinced that even though dreams had not come to fruition the way I would have wanted them, the need to dream was essential for the human condition. That we need to dream, and that is how we have become and be and are who we are now, because we have dared to dream big dreams. So this book is about this little boy who dreams of this creature and who doesn't give up. He doesn't give up. He's left alone. Nobody believes in him. He talks to dogs and to goats and to everybody who tells him, give up, give up. What's so important about your dream? But he keeps going and going until he finally gets to where he wanted to get. And thanks to that little boy not giving up on his dream, we have the butterfly. It's the idea, and that beauty, whatever you create that is beautiful, it's going to be forever. It's the thing of beauty is a joy forever. And that maybe our place and our mission in this world, and I see that as an artist, as a writer, is to create that beauty, to create those moments when we can recognize ourselves like people who long for beauty, who long for that space of transcendence where we are our best.
You know, I was thinking about what you were saying also, Rebecca, about the way that Mira's world is changing. You know, that when we get to a certain point in childhood, we start to see ourselves differently and our families differently. And I wondered if you could just talk about how Mira's neighborhood contributes to that. You know, just how she operates within it.
Let me think about that.
I'll do a tap dance.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think it has a lot to do with her neighborhood and her stage of life, and her friendships are all kind of interlocked in my mind. And one of the big things that's happening with Miranda this year is that her best friend, sort of earliest friend, you know, from forever, people, you know, someone she has memories of sharing an infancy with, ends their friendship abruptly and without any reason that he's willing to give her. It's a boy who lives in her building. And that is what really starts breaking her world apart. And that's really what leads to the rest, I think. Because I think that, and this friend lives in her building, and it's based on a friendship I had. And they live in the same apartment line, so they actually have the same apartment, you know, footprint. And they both are living with single moms. And it's like this nice parallel situation. And I think that this is what childhood is like for a lot of people, whether they live in the city or in the, you know, a country, or, you know, there is this sort of nest period where you know people who are like you. I mean, and maybe not so parallel as the relationship between these two kids in the book, but you know what you know, and for a time that seems like the whole universe. And there's this feeling that you know what there is to know. And then something kind of mysterious happens and you realize that you don't know anything. And that's really scary. And if the person who you're really dependent upon, you know, this is what happens to Miranda, just sort of says, I can't do this anymore, that suddenly she's forced out. I mean, she's sort of kicked out of this world in which she understands and she knows what there is to know. And this is what causes her to, you know, she's finally forced to reach out to a couple of girls in her grade. And one of them becomes a friend and one of them becomes sort of a nemesis. And they both have a lot more money than she does. And she has that experience of walking into an apartment and thinking, oh, you know, that's interesting. And suddenly is interacting with parents who are really different from her mom who she lives with, and not better necessarily, just really different. And then there's also, you know, New York City life, you know, there's homeless people. And she starts to sort of reevaluate everything that she's taken for granted, you know, that she's made a lot of assumptions about really everyone in her world. This storekeeper, this guy who owns a sandwich place, this teacher, the homeless guy in her corner, the rich girl in her class, and even Sal, who's her friend, who's sort of shut the door in her face. And, you know, what she learns throughout the course of the book is that mostly she's wrong about pretty much everything. And, you know, this is a period of life that I remember. She begins to question, you know, why do I think this? What am I assuming about this person? And, you know, I remember being a kid and having the realization that if I heard someone behind me walking, I lived on a block that was sort of like two one-way streets that meet head to head. So it was a very quiet block. You know the block? Very quiet block. It was great. We could sled on it in the winter, and we would play ball like in the street. There were just not a lot of traffic, and not a block with any doorman type situations at all. And in fact, there were a lot of abandoned brownstones, which you don't see so much in New York anymore. But half the block was like abandoned brownstones where you could see, there was no roof, and there were all these feral cats that lived on the block, and we were really independent on the street from a young age, and so it was kind of like this wilderness, even though it wasn't a wilderness. And I was alone on the street, from age 9 or something, and I remember one day thinking, if I hear someone walking behind me, and I turn around and it's a woman, I'm not scared. But if I turn around and there's a man there, I'm scared. And it was the first time I began to think, when you turn around, who don't you want to see behind you? And why? What assumptions am I making? And I mean, I have a very vivid memory of thinking about this. And at the same time that, of course, I was 11, so I was thinking about God and free will and, death, all this heavy stuff that I thought about as a kid, and I think a lot of us think about in childhood, and then maybe don't think about as much when we're older, or for a while we don't. Maybe we get distracted. That all contributed, I think, or fed this story. And so the neighborhood really had a lot to do with it. I also just want to add that when I was in 6th grade, elementary school used to go to 6th grade, now it only goes to 5th grade. I don't know why. 6th grade was a great year, it's sad. But we had this great group called Teachers and Writers Collaborative come into the public school where I went to elementary school, and they did all these great film workshops, and we did cartooning, and we put on a performance of Uncle Vanya, if you can believe it, at the Symphony Space. And we did crazy, wonderful things. And one thing we did was a literary magazine that for some reason we called the Spicy Meatball. I don't know why. Yeah, it was called the Spicy Meatball. And so there was, and this is maybe somewhat different from today's world of school, in New York anyway, which is the only world I know anymore, where, we would generate material, and these writers who were working with us would create the book based on what we had done. And it was art and it was writing. And, so we had these sections. I still have this magazine. And, it was family and dreams and things. And then one section was street people. Because this was a big, big part of our lives, was, negotiating and sort of grappling with the idea that people lived on the street. And there was sort of safety, and there was also these inner questions about how you reacted to people who were on the street. And then there was also the idea that you often walked by someone on the street who obviously needed some kind of help, and were trained, we were trained to sort of walk by and ignore them. And I don't think I ever stopped thinking about that in a way. And so that's why I think that ended up being sort of a significant piece in the book. And it's something I still think about now that I'm raising my own kids here, and, now basically I train them to walk by people on the street who obviously need help. And it's something that I think is worth thinking about and talking about, because I think that there's a lot of deep questions in that kind of experience. And so all of that informed sort of some of the inner struggle in the story.
Thank you. That's great.
And of course, I did 2 books in countries where I had never been. So that was really interesting. The reason that they gave me was because they really wanted us to work hard, and they really liked the fact that when we did research, we actually did a better job. I don't believe it for a minute. But it actually, it's hard because I also really need to know a place the way I need to know a voice. I mean, a voice has to be honest and it has to be from deep within, or else it's fake. And a place sort of has to be that way too. I mean, even if you're talking about a specific place like a country, but also, what is place? I mean, if M.T. Anderson wrote a book called Feed, where it has an enormous sense of place, but there really is no place. The place is what's been put inside the teenager's mind by advanced technology of a future time. Place, it means a lot of different things. It has to be very organic. For 39 Clues, I had to do so much research before I could be actually comfortable writing. But I also had to experience place from the point of view of a kid. So for instance, setting an adventure in South Africa, where I also had never been, took a lot of work, and I interviewed a lot of people, read a lot of books, magazines, listened to tons of music, because I think that also helps give you a sense for people and place. But there was something as silly as place names, I think, are also very important. There was a scene where one of the characters in the 39 Clues actually ends up with a bomb in his hat, and another character is threatening to detonate it from across the street. Of course, this doesn't really happen, but I needed a setting for this place, and I knew that if I wrote the scene in, if I were a non-New Yorker writing a scene like this and I set it on 43rd and 9th, a person from New York would read it and say, "What? Get out of here! The guy would be slapped in jail." So I didn't want to either that or just let be. I didn't want to set it. We'll let him blow him up. I didn't want to set it in a place that was unrealistic. So of course I'm using Google Earth and all the research tools that I can, and I'm hovering over Pretoria, all this stuff, looking for a certain tree cover. I needed a slope. There were certain things that I needed for the scene. I needed to have the right place, and you can go right down to street level, of course. So I'm sort of looking for all of a sudden I come across Boom Street. Right? I mean, you can't not set this scene on Boom Street. So, so sure enough, down on street level, I found the place with the tree cover, so that if you were, from Pretoria and you read this scene, you say, yeah, that's exactly where it would be. Yep. It's tricky. Historical fiction is another consideration. I mean, I've written some historical fiction, and I love doing that. The novel Smiler's Bones that you mentioned is about a polar Eskimo boy, based on a true story, who's brought to the United States at the turn of the last century, 1897, along with 5 other polar Eskimos. These are people who've farthest north living people in the world. They'd never seen trees in their lives, and all of a sudden he and his father and 4 others are brought to New York City to be put on display for various reasons. Basically, it's a publicity stunt. And he's got to now not only get used to a world that has vegetation, but New York City. And how do you experience New York, not in this time, but in a time 100 years ago? And then the next level of experience is, how do you experience it through the eyes of somebody with this background, which is hard enough. To me, it was the greatest writing experience I ever had, because you've got to strip yourself down to the absolute basics of humanity and see something as if you were just born, in a way. And I started seeing things about my own city that I never dreamed of. I started seeing buildings as living things, because you would in his situation. The cliche is, the place becomes a character in a novel, but it's absolutely true. And I think writing for children, you got to be really careful, because you cannot go too far off the deep end with place description. It just, it's boring. And the play, you've got to do it, and you've got to do it in such a way that you're keeping your voice strong, you're keeping your characters moving, and you're keeping the play so vivid that the kid is really going to think that he or she has been there. Because it's an act of discovery, for every reader, and even more so for children. And I think place and voice are really inextricable.
What Peter was saying was striking a note for me because this fascination of describing the first time for somebody, because I wrote a novel called Infinity in the Palm of Her Hand, which is a recreation of the story of paradise, seen from the perspective of Eve. Because we never think about what happened to Adam and Eve once they were thrown out of paradise. In the Bible, there are only 40 versicles that talk about them, and then they disappear from the story. And I found these apocryphal books that talked about what had happened to them and how they had coped, with this world where they had been. It's like they were in a 5-star hotel and they were thrown out into this empty landscape. And it was so fascinating so sensuous and fantastic to write those scenes when the first time they feel hungry and they are thirsty because they never had those feelings. They were basically like angels. I mean, death comes into the world because they bite the apple, the fig in this case, because there were no apples in that region of the world. And and so I always think about this is the sense of discovery that I was talking about at the beginning. When you are writing, you have to put yourself into all these places and acquire the eyes of whoever the character is. And that is when there is a very interesting process of not only being empathetic with whoever the character is, but also being able to see yourself in a different light, being able to mimetize. It's a fantastic exercise. That's why I think that empathy is one of the principal qualities that a good writer needs to have. And why, this morning they were saying or yesterday, there was a panel, among the many panels that there have been in this World Voices Festival. Somebody was saying that they should kill creative writing programs because what happens is that they teach people to write perfect sentences, but not to see inside or not to see from this perspective. And that we have now so many books that are perfectly well written, but that do not say anything and do not relate to anybody. Which is very interesting.
It is very interesting. I've got to say, I'm so impressed that someone from Nicaragua just taught me a word that I don't know and I will cherish for the rest of my life. Mimetize. Did you say mimetize? I love that. Are you all writing this down?
What is it?
It's beautiful. I know what it means, but I've never.
It doesn't exist.
It does
I
exist.
do that.
It
I do
certainly
that.
does.
Well, I got carried away and I'm going over your time. So I'm going to open up the floor now to your questions. Does anybody have one? Because I have more if you don't. Yes, Vera
I have a
Williams.
question. I'm just fascinated by what I've been hearing, and I'm so glad I came.
And you're all
But
fascinated with you.
it's really very interesting that you have always talking about creating something in which the material which you use besides yourselves and so forth is language, but nobody has even used that word. So there's something you could probably tell us and you thought about the connection between creating a place and people and also one's child. I remember as a child part of loving to read was the language and the power it gave you, and also its connection to one's early rhyme. If you had the experience of having been brought up with poetry or rhyme or songs or music, and the sheer power of it, intellectually also to control the world. But and so especially writing about the age you were writing when the intellectual problems of God and what's true and what's not true and who will kill me if I don't look behind me, all those things. They're embedded in some relation to language, I think. So I just would like to hear a little bit about that.
I'm not going to get all of Vera's question, but she is asking about language, if they could address how they use language to create these worlds that we've been talking about up
Yeah,
here.
it's positioned to them because it talked about so many other elements.
Well, in the beginning was the Word,
Right.
and the Word was God. I think that is so beautiful. I mean, I'm not religious, but I have to admit that that was true. And I think the Word is you know, Mario Vargas Llosa used to say that the writer is like a kills God, you know, un deicida, you know, like an infanticide. It's a deicide, God side. I don't know how to say it in English, but that, you know, because you become a God, you create with words. You are creating a world, and I think the mastery of the word is what you learn through the process of becoming a writer and of exercising your writing power. And I think that's one thing that is fascinating, because you really have to have your toolbox, you know, and that's one of the things one learns, that language is not a game, you know, that it's not just that you're going to sit down and start writing, that you really, in order to break every rule in the book, you have to know every rule in the book. That's something that is very interesting.
I mean, you know, you write poetry, and your books are beautiful and spare and have no extraneous words, and that's, I think, so important to all children's literature. I mean, to all literature in general. You can do different things when you're writing for adults. You know, your sentences can be longer and more convoluted and have a different kind of style. With kids, you don't ever want to talk down and dilute, but on the other hand, you have to talk to them in a way that they'll listen. And I mean, if you listen to a conversation between two children, between two people in general, and you transcribe it, I mean, I've done this, you know, transcribe, it's just impenetrable. It just makes no sense whatsoever. And you know, have you ever tried that? Have you? It's like you're walking on the street, or you know, if you really listen to what people are saying, and it's comical. You burst out laughing. Well, I was like, and then I said, oh, and then she said, oh, and then I was like, and then she was. It's if you tried to write it down, you know, and word for word, you wouldn't know what the hell the person was saying. And if you try to imitate that in a book, it's horrible. And what we're doing is distilling language and regurgitating it. I mean, it's killing God. I mean, essentially, it's becoming the word ourselves, and distilling it in a way that is going to sound real, but is artificial completely. You know, when you think about it, so that a child is going to read it and say, yes, you know, absolutely. It's incredibly hard to do. And what I find happens is I finish my book, and as I've written it, I've gone back over and over and over and over and over, especially the first chapter. I mean, it'll sometimes take me 2 months to write a first chapter. And every step of the way, I go back and rewrite, 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 until finally it's done. And based on how I've concluded each day, by that time the book should be perfect. And I go back to the beginning, and I don't even know, I can't even believe it's English. It's horrible. It's awful. And the reason is because by the end of the book, I've created a language for the characters that has finally started to work. And it doesn't usually start to work until the last third of the book. But that language hasn't been in place at the beginning with all that work that I've done. But now, going back to the beginning, because the toolkit has been established, I can slash like crazy, throw out enormous amounts of work. It doesn't feel bad, it feels great. Because now I can talk that language. Now, you know, the rhythm, word choice, the spirit is there, but you had to fight so hard to get it. And at the beginning of my career, I would think, oh my God, how could I just destroy all this beautiful stuff that I did at the beginning of the book? But now, at the end of my career, when I go back, it feels great. I feel like, thank God I can actually make this right, because it isn't. By that time, it's like Beethoven, coming to the end of the fifth. Coming to the end of the Fifth Symphony, at the very beginning, he goes back and he hears ba 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 ba. And he goes, oh, now I know what to do. Let's just cut out those notes. That's what it's like.
I'm going to say something very quick, which is that to me this is a big mystery, and I'm trying to think of a better way to say that, and I can't. I will say that I think that sometimes when it comes to words and language, beauty can get in the way. And sometimes, it can be a struggle to stay true kind of to the person I'm writing about and the ideas that I'm writing about. And often, unlike Peter, the voice that I want to create in a story comes very early in the writing of the book. Often it's the first thing I write, because I think when I'm finally, after months of having something in my head, if I'm finally, driven to sit down and write something, it means that I have some feeling of compulsion about it. And often that is where the voice will come in its best form, and I like to use that kind of almost as a touchstone later, where I feel like my voice is getting generic or something is it's losing something. I'll go back and reread some piece that feels like a touchstone piece to me. And so yeah, that's completely different. But often when I'm revising, I don't know whether I'm making the language better or worse. Not just the story, but the language. So there's like a numbness or something that happens, and I have to come in and out a lot to figure that out, re-enter the story a lot to figure that out, and it feels hit or miss a lot of the time. Maybe that's because I didn't go to one of those MFA programs.
Yes.
Can I ask Peter to speak quickly about your unusual collaboration with the wonderful Harry Mazer, another fine novelist?
How quickly would you like me to speak? About my collaboration with Harry Mazer. Well, Harry Mazer, how many of you know Harry Mazer? I say the name, how about Norma Fox Mazer, who's was Harry's wife. Harry has written some incredible books for kids that my boys loved, and I loved reading as an adult. The Last Mission was one of them. Harry lied his way into World War II, he was too young, and he said that he was older, and and was shot down over Czechoslovakia, I think, and was taken in. He's led an amazing life, and he's an extraordinary writer, and he sort of became a good friend and a mentor to me as I was starting out. Harry had an idea for a book. The idea was a young soldier, contemporary soldier, comes back from Iraq. He has been in an IED explosion. He's okay, but he's suffered long-term memory loss. So he comes back home, and his whole world now has to adjust to the fact that he doesn't know who he is. His girlfriend, his best friend, his family. It was just a seed of an idea, and he'd done a lot of research for it. Harry, I guess I could say this, Harry had a stroke. He was physically pretty much okay, but was not able to complete the book. He couldn't really work on the book. And was, I think, possibly in danger of having to renege on the contract, whatever, I don't know. But Harry and I share the same agent, and I've been in touch with Harry and Norma all the time after they moved to Vermont. Anyway, our agent basically said, what do you think? Would you like to collaborate and finish this book? And I just thought that it was an amazing idea, and I connected very much with the character and the themes, and I just was thrilled with the idea of actually working with somebody who I admired so much. And so the book is coming out in February, and there's an excerpt. The first 2 chapters are excerpted on the Penn website. It's called Somebody, and we also have a great cover image. It's called Somebody Please Tell Me Who I Am, and it was just so it was a collaboration, in a sense. I mean, it's not like we got together in a room. It was pretty much more like a relay race. Harry handed it off to me, and then I took it.
Yes, in the back there with the glasses.
I have a question about YA books or the teen market. It seems like a lot of what's being put out today is chasing a trend, and a lot of it seems to me to lack an authentic voice, the kind of compelling character that you feel is alive. Especially Peter and Rebecca, since you've both written. Since your books are for kids who are about to become teenagers, what are your thoughts on what is a good book for a teenager as opposed to a child or an adult? What's different about the voice
Oh, I see.
to stand out from the vampire chasers?
Well, actually, this book is great. Her book is great.
Can you repeat the question?
Could everyone hear the question? The question was, in YA, there seems to be a lot of writing to the trend, and how, what are the books, especially Peter, since he writes for children who are about to become teens, what are the books he would recommend that are not the vampire chasers?
Oh, what books would I recommend?
Well, what characteristics make a strong teen book? How would you create a voice for a teen book?
Oh, I see.
As opposed to a children's book
Yeah.
and adult book?
I mean, I think with teens, you have a bigger canvas in a way. I mean, I've written for teens also. Smiler's Bones was a YA book. Somebody Please Tell Me Who I Am is a YA book. I got really a little antsy a couple of years ago, and I wanted to write a caper. I wanted to write sort of an Elmore Leonard caper that used bad words and drugs and horrible situations. And I wrote a book called WTF. It was a working title. I never for a minute thought that they would actually keep it as a title. Never. They did. It creates a bit of a problem, when I visit schools, 3rd to 6th graders, and inevitably there's one wise guy who says, "What does WTF stand for?" And I say, Wisconsin Tourist Federation. But I think with, it's the same thing with kids, and it's the same thing with adults. Yes, there are trends, and yes, people are writing to the trends, and yes, a publishing company is going to say, in some cases, oh, a 25-year-old recent Iowa workshop graduate with a great vampire idea, we can sell it. Of course, it's going to happen. Whatever the trend is 5 years from now, same thing. But even in those novels, I think, and in all novels in general, the only thing that's really going to, the only thing that really makes sense, I think, is to write about something that you're passionate about, and not worry about selling it. I mean, if you write to the trend, it's going to, I think, personally, if you write to a trend, it's going to fail. Because I even think that some of these people who write for vampires are real at heart vampire storytellers. Seriously. And there have always been a lot of vampire storytellers. And in 1995, not one of them could sell a book. And now they're all selling books. Just like there are probably a lot of historical fiction people right now who are not selling books, but maybe in 2015 they will. I mean, you cannot write to a trend, I think, that doesn't really speak to you deep inside and expect to be successful with any measurement. My advice would always be, yes, write what's personally important to you, but also write something that just gets your heart going, gets you really excited, and that's it.
I just also want to add quickly that if you read blogs that there are so many terrific blogs, like Jenny's blog, and which have you mentioned? It was mentioned, right? 20 by Jenny.
Say it again.
20 by Jenny.
Is
But
that
there are
20
many.
Is that digits 20 or TW?
No, it's not. It's spelled out, right? So there are so many passionate readers of YA literature who are blogging and talking about wonderful books. The books are out there. They're not getting the shelf space and they're not getting promoted in the glitziest way, but there are of course always passionate booksellers who can talk to you about them if you can find those passionate booksellers. Generally you can find them in independent bookstores, but I don't want to generalize. Also, go online. You will find, many wonderful books, like books by Sarah Zarr and Francisco Stork, and many people are writing just wonderful, valuable, books from the heart that are gorgeous, and I don't have a problem with vampire books. I want the field to be broader than that, and so it's a matter of going out and being really aggressive about finding those books, but they are absolutely there, to be found.
If you don't get the feeds from Shelf Awareness and PW Daily and Hornbook, and what's this one? The other one, SLJ. I don't know if you get those, but you do. You get them all, every single one. Kirkus has a feed too.
Kirkus has a website now with free content.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great. A school library journal. So I find those really invaluable. I read them, every day. I usually skim through them. But when I get to the review section, that a lot of times that's how I learn about new books, because I'll see something that's really interesting, click through, get to the page, and that page itself will have 2 or 3 other books that I find really interesting. I think it's a great resource.
Don't you get the press?
Don't I get the press? Of course, because I didn't write it.
Exactly. Well, I would like to thank all of you for coming today and bearing with the weather and all of that, and thank you to our panelists.